Here, I'm looking at the staff report. It says, historically, monographs were established and amended through a three-phase public rulemaking process. FDA and stakeholders reported challenges with this process, and then it lists three things. But one of them is a lack of flexibility for industry to propose innovative modifications. Mr. Menzel, innovative modifications, there must have been some to try to speed things up. Can you share with us what those might be, and have there been some, or are there some in mind?
In terms of innovative modifications, that would mostly be around inactive ingredients, and so what's critical to the OMUFA and the monograph system is whenever you have the monograph in place, you have a cookbook, if you will, as it relates to the active ingredients, and that's stable. The innovation that can then be around inactive ingredients, forms, et cetera, as long as the claims and the active ingredients are adhered to.
The entire concept, as I understand it, of the CARES Act and later OMUFA, the fees that were paid by the industry, was to kind of speed things up, to try to coordinate, do something to make this all happen
Correct.
faster.
Right.
I notice over time that the number of people working for the FDA has increased substantially, close to 20,000 people now working for the FDA. We've heard a lot about the 3,500 that are being cut, but there's still, we start with 20,000 folks. Now somehow that number was not adequate to speed things up, and thus OMUFA. It says here again in the staff report, FDA in turn commits to adhere to certain performance goals negotiated by the FDA and regulated industry representatives. You indicated that the framework was being put in place to make this work. Is it going to work? We got 20,000 people, now we have fewer, but it wasn't working at the time, thus the legislation. Is this legislation going to help speed things up?
Yeah, I think so. I still believe that the infrastructure in place was a big issue. I think the first 5 years was built for that. I think the FDA did meet performance goals. There were some guidance documents and hiring efforts that were delayed. But again, the FDA has been a fair and constructive partner in all this, and you know, the guidance that's been implemented by the FDA has been somewhat delayed, and I think that's another thing that, in terms of transparent talks with the FDA, that this group has already addressed.
Thank you. I'm going to you, Mr. De Ruiz. I note in your report you mention the fact that no new filters have been approved in the U.S., limiting Americans' choice to 10 over time. And I guess I'm sorry, I'm speaking to the wrong, I'm looking at the wrong report. Let me flip back to you, Ms. Wezek. And what you mentioned is that there are 10 UV filters, but there are over 30 approved globally. And again, and you kind of state that this is because of an insistence on animal testing on sunscreens. Is there something happening in that space that the agency just refuses to acknowledge that it could be doing these things differently, as is the case around the world? What's going on with, why are we going so slowly is the question.
Yeah, and it's a very valid one, I think. In the United States, we regulate sunscreen as a drug and not a cosmetic. There are places in the world that have the inverse in effect. So they have different safety standards that they have to meet, safety and efficacy. So that's issue one. Issue two is that even within the countries that do regulate sunscreen as a drug, like we do, they have different testing criteria. So for us, we insist on the maximum usage trial, the MUST test, as well as animal testing to get that safety and efficacy data.
Let me hop back, because it doesn't seem like throwing more people at the problem is going to solve it. It seems like it's more of a policy issue. Do you think that Congress should be stepping in here and saying, hey, stop this type of testing, or do you have some other approach that we should use?
We have asked Congress, both with various Hill days with my organization, as well as when the PASS Coalition came to the Hill, to address that regulatory framework to move away from must trials and animal testing, or to at least consider, as Mr. Ruiz said, to consider other data as supplemental or alternatives to those two issues.
Thank you so much. Yield back.